Hello, and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the 32nd Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1959. Jack Clayton came out of the gate with a critically acclaimed but slightly controversial debut, the British romantic drama Room at the Top. The film went on to be nominated for 6 Academy Awards and won Best Actress and Best Adapted Screenplay. But it just so happened to come out in the year of Ben-Hur, which so utterly dominated that it set a record for most Oscars won by a single film, 11, including Best Picture. But did Room at the Top come close? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to Room at the Top. Welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I am your host, Kevin Jacobson, and we have made it into the 50s. Hooray! As I go backwards through Oscar history, we start, of course, with 1959. And so, to welcome me into the 50s, you heard her as a co-host on Citizen Dame. She is a film critic, screenwriter, legend, and here she is with me.
You're too kind.
Yes, to talk 1959. Please welcome Miss Kimberly Pierce.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for having me.
To have you on. Yes, this should be a fun one. There's a lot of great stuff in 1959, so.
Definitely looking forward to it.
All right. And today we are talking about the Best Picture runner-up, Room at the Top, which lost Best Picture to Ben-Hur. So first off, just for a quick summary of Room at the Top, it is a British romantic drama based on the 1957 novel of the same name by John Brain. It tells the story of Joe Lampton, who is a young man from a kind of a desolate town who moves to Warnley to get a high-paying job in the treasurer's department and meets 2 women who will essentially change his life forever. One is Susan Brown, the daughter of a wealthy family who Joe finds himself very attracted to, and there's also Alice Askill, who is a little bit older, a little more experienced than Susan, and is kind of living in a loveless marriage. And so Joe is carrying on these affairs with both women at various points, and he's torn between the both of them while also really battling some inner conflict about what he really wants in life. So the film stars Lawrence Harvey as Joe, Heather Sears as Susan, Simone Signoret as Alice, Hermione Baddeley, Donald Houston, Ambrosine Philpotts, love that name, and Alan Cuthbertson. So Room at the Top made $2.4 million at the U.S. box office, was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, winning 2, but not Best Picture. All right, Kim, so what are your thoughts on Room at the Top?
I thought this was a fascinating watch because this was a new one for me, though I am a big fan of the British New Wave. So that was, as soon as I started watching it, it immediately hit for me as definitely one of the more polished entries in that movement. And it was a fascinating viewing in just how that was structured, but so different when you're looking at definitely the other films from 1959. It's such a snapshot of what looks to be British culture during the time, very endemic of that angry young man archetype, the disillusionment after the war, and coming into hard contrast with, the United States, which was riding such a high period at the same time. I was really captivated, particularly by the Simone Signoret performance, it just made so much sense that she was really the one to come out on top of those acting categories. But in terms of the other British New Wave films, this one actually to me paled in comparison to something like Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, and Look Back in Anger, which was out the same year as this. So it seemed almost a surprise that this was the one to really gain the most attention, because I felt this was actually one of the weaker ones. But that it looked very good, just as such, like I said, as such a contrast to something like Ben-Hur. You have, with that, you have the big Hollywood epic. This is such an intimate, such a well-crafted, we're looking at these characters, you're really involved with them. And they're dealing with such raw, emotional topics as, compared to some of the other things at the time. I wasn't necessarily as impressed with Lawrence Harvey, but I mean, like I said, Signoret was amazing. The Susan character I found fascinating. There's so much going on, such interesting character stuff and the melodrama, that it was really fun. Fun is probably the wrong word, but from a 1950s melodramatic perspective, right. I think it works.
Well, I love a good melodrama, and that is what this film definitely gives me. There's the love triangle, there's the high emotions, there's the inner turmoil, the class conflict, gorgeous actors, everything. Even though that the film is set in the 50s, it feels set
post-war,
in time in the 50s.
Right?
Yes. I think it's actually set in the
47 or something,
right.
I thought I saw.
Right. But I think the film itself does feel at times set in the 50s, but so it doesn't necessarily feel totally timeless, but it does have a sensibility to it that I think is very fresh and new and part of that British New Wave. It does not shy away from being very intimate and talking very frankly about sex and love and depicting adultery, which was quite taboo at the time.
Most certainly.
Yeah. And it's not like it's hinted at with little innuendos to make sure it gets the seal of approval or anything like that, So not only that, I do think it does go to some interesting sort of mature territory with the character of Joe. I understand what you're saying when you say that you're kind of mixed on the Lawrence Harvey performance. I think the character is supposed to be younger than how Lawrence Harvey presents in the film, and it's an interesting kind of juxtaposition there. But I do think he is doing kind of some layered work at the same time.
Yep, that's exactly what I was just going to say, that complexity in the character, because you can really see as he gets going. You go from the youth, the gold digging, for lack of a better word, but I love the emotion you see creep through, especially in the scenes with Alice, and especially towards the end.
Oh yeah,
beautiful stuff.
And I mean, it's interesting how he ends up losing the Oscar to a pretty unambiguous hero type with Charlton Heston as Ben-Hur. It's a very different kind of performance that ends up being victorious there, but I would say that he's better than Charlton Heston personally.
Oh, I would completely. That was one thing I was definitely going to make sure I said, that Charlton Heston played Charlton Heston.
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly what that was, and at least you saw that layered character work with Harvey in this one.
Right, even though I probably wouldn't even go for him either in that category, which I'll get to a little later in terms of some of the other options, but it's still a very interesting, complex sort of character that I think is interesting because I haven't read the novel that it's based on, but from what I understand, there was some structural changes to how the novel is presented, especially the film really doesn't present anything with Joe's earlier life, kind of his humble beginnings. And we obviously get more of his internal life just by nature of what a novel can do versus what film can do, but also just the film kind of has to give us some more reasons to sympathize with Joe, I think, considering we're cutting out a large part of his beginning, so we don't really get to know him before what he's doing now, so that's kind of interesting there. But Definitely the highlight for me is Simone Signoret.
Hmm.
She is
Completely.
just, from minute one, I think, is so in control of who that character is.
It's captivating. It's truly
Yeah,
a captivating performance.
yeah, definitely. Even in the scenes that kind of require her to be vulnerable and wounded just because of the situation she's in, she still has such a captivating presence. Like
Hmm.
she's doing a lot of face acting, but it's not too like obvious or over the top. You know,
Yeah.
she
Oh
feels
no, not
so
at all.
lived in. It's like yeah, I mean, she's just so emotionally raw and she's present, and kind of desperate for companionship, and it's a really kind of tricky blend, but I do think she ends up pulling it off.
And that win just makes perfect sense
It
as it
does.
comes together. It's I was just stunned watching how good she was, and that, like you said, that power kind of mixed with that vulnerability. She brings it all together so well, leading up to the climactic. Everything that goes on in that climax, and ultimately where that ends up going.
Hmm.
But and in the face of everything, and in the face of it being the later 50, the late 50s, and the melodrama, I loved the strength that she portrays. She never really seems, well, she's emotional and she's wounded and she's vulnerable. She never quite, becomes that, almost that stereotypical weepy, obnoxious female character.
Right. Right. And I mean, I will say that this is a kind of character and the presentation, kind of like you're saying, that I think it could just be a performance that feels very defined by the male co-star sort of thing. Like she's almost more of a concept than a person.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, and it's very British. That's very British New Wave too. You have that. It's in so many of them. You have that idea of the older, experienced,
Yeah.
woman that that Madonna and Madonna and the Whore,
Hmm.
for to go back to that.
Right. And also they're very kind of obvious with like the way they're dressed as well, kind of
Hmm.
with the white virginal and then the more darker clothing on Alice. You know, it's not the most original idea, but it does allow you to separate the two very well.
And a good performance can really allow you to rise above some of those issues, and she brings it.
Definitely, yeah. Um, Going back to Joe a little bit, since he is our main character, I think it's interesting how the film it does want you to sympathize with him in many ways, but then it's definitely not afraid to just like kind of not throw him under the bus, but make you really start to question that, especially in that argument scene that they have. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, where it really comes to blows. And it's kind of he's confronting her about her having a past and having modeled in the nude.
Yes, that one.
And yeah, really, he really becomes a jerk in that moment, and
Hmm.
he comes close to abusing her.
Right.
And he has that line which is just almost shocking, where he kind of says like, now I understand why men are driven to kill women in this situation. And I'm like, Jesus, okay. Like this
those
escalated quickly.
These are those problematic moments where you're going, wow, how far we have come at times with some
Yeah.
of it. I mean, and that, coming back to that angry young man, we saw, I mean, like the closest thing I can come to in the, Hollywood cinema, film noir, right around the same, post-war,
Mm.
we're looking at that disillusioned masculinity that was just so rampant through that time. And it's something that's not really talked about a lot, I would say, in mainstream kind of cultural analysis. You have to dive back
Mm.
into really, you have to dive into classic film history when you're reading this. And it's something that's so hard to understand in when you're watching, I'm born in 1986. We have, wasn't around for that. We haven't seen anything that's quite as similar. So this is one of those cultural moments where we have to kind of step back and go, how, try and understand where that's coming from.
Mm.
And I mean, it's hard to watch. And I know that really, that scene in particular for me was a very kind of one of those, probably the hardest ones with the Joe character, just to even wrap my head around it. I mean, thinking
Yeah.
of the Albert Finney character in Saturday Night, Sunday Morning is really just as rough at times. And these characters are so rough around the edges. And this is such a product of the time that these films were coming out of.
Right.
And it's a struggle from the contemporary perspective, but we saw something completely similar with any character Glenn Ford played and film noir. It's such a similar character of this disaffected, struggling idea fresh out of war, and then they were hit, and the European, people in Europe were hit by that war so much harder because it was on their home front.
Yeah, and it also is an interesting kind of hypocritical thing at times, because he becomes kind of just very like moral in moments like that, when he is also having this affair. He is making this woman kind of commit adultery, not making her, but he's in this situation and doesn't quite seem to have a problem with that.
He's very holier than thou. I mean,
right.
It's fine if he's doing it, but goodness knows if she, takes off her clothes for an artist, she's,
Right. And by the way, that was in her past, like before she even met him. And,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. I just want to quickly talk about the cinematography here, which by Freddie Francis, one of the better kind of domestic drama sorts of cinematographers at the time, who this is more of a domestic drama, so it's tough to get super showy and impressive and film school sort of thing with it, but I really did find it to be serving the sort of personal drama really well, and very, very friendly to the actors, that deep focus.
Definitely.
Especially in those moments like Joe and Alice, and how they're in bed and he's resting his head on her chest, which is a really great scene, or a great shot.
That shot is, that's exactly the one that's in my head, and that's shot so well, and it gives those actors such an opportunity to shine. And that was, I'd say, Harvey was so good in those quiet moments, and
yes.
it completely stands out.
Right. And obviously it's kind of up to the actors to sort of communicate the way that their characters change and feel different about each other over time. But I do think that the way the camera really lingers on them really helps to just make you more invested in sort of their inner lives.
And you have to with those melodramas, because they're such the focus, and you're dealing with such material that you can't see those little moments if you don't have the good cinematography.
So what do you think about how the film treats like the class differences? Because that's a big theme as well.
Oh, it definitely is. I thought it was poignant. The scene that really jumps to mind, and Harvey is so amazing in the scene. It's like the party sequence where he goes over to the table, where Susan's having dinner with her family, and the kind of that upper crust kind of group, and you have to this painfully drawn out sequence, and you just watch him get further and further knocked off his horse, and he's trying to be, what he imagines himself to be, what he wants himself to be. And as he's talking with these older upper class men, he's falling further and further. And suddenly he's just, the kid from the wrong side of the tracks trying to hold his own. And he's so vulnerable in this moment. And that's really, I would say, one of the things, the treatment of class is one of the things that makes Joe relatable at the most level. The desire to be able to, bring yourself up from nothing, to be able to move to the big city and make something of yourself. That's something Hollywood has dealt with, cinema's dealt with, the American dream, this is such a theme that's so relatable to people. Does he go about it the best way? No. And those are where you see him struggling the most, but you can really see how he's affected by his upbringing. Another great scene is the moment where he goes to his hometown.
Yes.
And that burnt the bombed out house where, when they're driving home, that the war is not that long ago. And this is where he's coming from. And you can see that desperation to bring himself beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
And sure. He's so affected by this, and he's so desperate to make himself better than he was. And so that becomes, it's such a common message. And I thought Lawrence Harvey was so great in how he did that that was probably Joe at his best.
Right, definitely. Those are the moments that actually make you do feel sympathy for him, even when you're feeling like, oh boy, I'm losing it with this guy. I don't know. But yeah, that scene where he goes home is very powerful and an interesting perspective, where we've seen through this whole film how kind of the upper crust people are really not wanting Joe to be with be with Susan, and so he's going home and kind of getting the same sort of treatment from I think it's his aunt and uncle who are there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they're kind of just like, oh, we're happy to know that you're interested in this girl, but we didn't know she was part of money. It's we want to make sure that you're in it for her and not the money. And that's such an interesting conflict. Yeah.
You start to feel like he just doesn't quite fit in anywhere.
Yeah.
He's so isolated. He can't squeeze himself into with the money. But yet in all these scenes when he goes home, or the scenes in the acting theater sequences, it's also, he never quite gels.
And how he doesn't say brazier, right?
Right.
Brazier.
Another moment there where it's just so vulnerably well acted from him, and you just feel for him immediately, because I'm sure we've all been there at times. Yeah. And it's that element that makes you want him to succeed, because he's an underdog, kind of thing. Exactly, very well said.
Yeah. Like even some of the moments that I did read were kind of beefed up from the novel itself, were in the moments where he's going up against some of that upper crust sort of thing, where someone like Jack Wales, who is supposed to be, I don't know if he's supposed to be engaged to Susan, but certainly is a suitor or something, and is really presented as kind of just this wealthy jerk. So very naturally sets us up to be sympathetic with Joe as the underdog. And what else is there? Like Alice's husband saying that he won't divorce Alice, and he'll even threaten legal action, things like that.
I have seen him in so many just British heck, even as recent as Fawlty Towers, in that exact same role. So that, it's complete. He's always that high class, jerky British aristocracy. And for however jerky and terrible Joe can be at times, he's coming up against it even worse in a lot of these characters. Susan's mother is another one that comes.
Yes. Who is just aggressively British. Yeah. I wanted to get your take on this ending. So, spoilers abound, but just spoiler warning, if you still want to watch the film, we're going to talk a little bit about the ending. Depending on how you look at it, quite a downbeat ending.
Oh, most certainly.
Yes.
That was probably what I had the hardest time with. Because and as I think it's supposed to be, my sympathies were with Alice that entire time.
100%, yeah.
And with the car accident, and then the description that goes into just how terrible her ending was.
Yeah.
She's... because she's described as pulling herself, around, basically dying on the pavement.
Yeah, and it didn't just instantly happen. It was linger for hours.
It took so long, and And the only reason all of this happens is because this comes after the climactic scene with Joe, where he finally tells her he's going off to be with Susan.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, for being the most likable, most, honest, genuine character, for her to just meet that end in that way, it's so hard to palate from, especially from a contemporary perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, shifting back to 1959, you start going into the fallen woman thing, however they would have defined it at that time. It was that hurt. That was very hard to watch. I found it really interesting after the wedding sequence, and how Susan, that shift you see in Susan, it's so subtle, but she has been this little meek figure. Right. And suddenly after this wedding, I mean, and because we figure out, and making sure I understood it right, she was pregnant before the wedding.
Yeah.
Which is what gets them, which is what kind of brings everything to a head. Suddenly, after they get married and Joe has seemingly gotten what he wants, now she's almost turning into her mother, or she suddenly switches on a dime, and you see this more, self-assured woman, and Joe is suddenly on the back foot again.
Yeah.
And I mean, ultimately is probably a little, you get a little bit, or I got at least a little, smug sense of satisfaction with it. Joe's so much has crashed and burned through this man's desire to just bring himself up in the world. You need to get that little hint of, well, he didn't get he's not quite gotten his happy ending. There's going to be a struggle there.
Yeah. Watching that's, first of all, just addressing the car accident stuff. I found that to be almost like unnecessarily cruel.
It was.
To Alice. Like, I don't see why that's necessary, just to draw out the tragedy even more. It's, I don't know. It just kind of bummed me out. And not in a good, like, sort of, wow, poetic, cinematic tragedy way. It's just like a kind of a gross way.
Yeah, it's beyond really what's needed at all. They didn't need, because that whole scene with is it the actress, is Hermione, the roommate?
Yes.
Or
Hermione Badley, who
was nominated for Best Supporting for that.
Yes, we're going to get to that.
Yeah. And she doesn't do a heck of a lot, but she is so captivating in that one scene. And it is so incredibly powerful. But it just compounds with everything, and just how cruel an ending that is for Alice.
Yeah, it's a very kind of ironic sort of ending, because I think it's kind of fascinating how, if Joe were to look at that ending of kind of the end result of getting married to Susan at the beginning of this film, I think he would feel like that was the goal. I accomplished what I wanted. But as you see by his own behavior in that moment after he gets married, he is not happy at all. He is like, I regret everything. And so, yeah, it's an interesting ending. And by the way, definitely watching it now, it made me feel like someone like Mike Nichols would be inspired for the ending to The Graduate.
Oh, so much. Yeah, very good. Very good thought.
Yeah, just like kind of the creeping doubt kind of coming in after this big, huge celebration that's supposed to be really happy for everyone, but then, the crashing reality comes down, and it's like,
take 3 steps forward and, 2 steps back,
Yeah. So I think he's very, Lawrence Harvey's very good in those moments like that, especially. So, yeah, I just wanted to touch on Hermione Badley here. Gets nominated for Best Supporting Actress. She is a history maker. She has the record for the shortest performance to ever be nominated for an Oscar.
What was it, 2.5 minutes? Something like that?
It is 2 minutes and 19 seconds.
Yeah.
So, yeah, she has, like, 2.5 scenes that are like 1 minute long.
And all the heavy lifting is done in that last scene.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it barely registered for me on that first scene. And then as soon as it comes, it's like, oh, okay, there's why it happened right there.
Yeah. But in that initial scene, I think it is, I do like kind of the presence she has as saying, like, you know, don't hurt her. Don't hurt Alice.
Very true.
I know you're going to, and I hope you don't. So that's kind of a nice scene.
Foreshadow.
Yes. Yes. Does she deserve to be nominated for this? I don't know. I mean, she has an interesting presence about her, I suppose, but I don't know if I would nominate 2 minutes of acting, to be honest.
It's hard. I'm trying to think of other
what's funny
options.
Is that, like, I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, it's not like it's a bad performance. Like, there are way worse performances nominated for Oscars that I quibble with.
I mean, and I'm looking at the Best Supporting list as we speak, and I know 2 of the options I thought of are already in there nominated. So I'm like, it's strong that's a testament to how strong they thought it was.
Yeah.
That length, and especially, I mean, they say how many times that, you know, one scene can, you know, knock that home. I mean, thinking to Emma Stone in La La Land with that audition sequence.
Yeah.
I mean, and that last scene does it. I mean, it drills it home. She really brings home the theme. It's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly moving.
Yeah. It is. It's like the Beatrice Strayton network. It's like the Viola Davis in Doubt, that sort of thing, where you have just one or 2 scenes and you just knock it out of the park. And good for her. You know, it was her only nomination. She was a celebrated sort of British actress. She would be in Mary Poppins. So, I mean, good for her, honestly. So, any other stray observations you wanted to make before we move on to the Oscar stuff?
I think that basically covers it for me.
Yeah, I feel like we really ran the gamut there with everything. All right, so yeah, if you want to watch it, it's on the Criterion channel, so widely available if you have the Criterion channel.
Amazon Prime as well. That's where I watched it.
There you go. Yep. And so yeah, it's a film from the 50s that is available to stream, believe it or not. When we come back, we will be discussing why Room at the Top lost Best Picture to Ben-Hur.
It's been hell these last weeks. I want you all the time. Not just stolen meetings.
Because all trailers must carry a U certificate, we are unable to show you scenes which the censor has passed for adult audiences only. Top, sensationally serialized in the Daily Express. Now, from the book's shock-provoking pages come the characters that have caused such a storm of emotion. Simone Signoret, one of Europe's greatest stars, 2-time award winner for the Best Actress of the Year, now in another brilliant portrayal as Alice Askill. She was French and all woman, 10 years older than Joe, 10 years more experienced.
Get it clear. From now on, you leave Alice alone. Understand me?
Why won't you let her go? Why?
Because she's my wife.
Lawrence Harvey as Joe Lampton. Bred in the slums, he wanted an Aston Martin and a girl with a Riviera tan, and didn't care how he got them.
Is that what prim Joe wants?
No, that's not what Joe wants.
Heather Sears in her first role since her sensational performance as Esther Costello. Now as the young, innocent rich girl, Susan Brown. She was Joe's pathway to the top. Co-starring Donald Woolford as her father. Rich enough to buy anything and pay off anybody.
I'll set you up on condition that you never see Susan again or communicate with her. But just get this into your head. If you refuse it, I'm going to break you.
Promise me you'll never ever see her again.
I can't do that. I'm going to see her just one more time. And tell her about us.
You could write to her?
I'm going to see her!
And we're back. So now we'll be discussing why Room at the Top lost Best Picture to Ben-Hur. So Room at the Top was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for Jack Clayton. By the way, didn't mention at the beginning his debut film, so kudos to him for that. Best Actor for Lawrence Harvey, Best Actress for Simone Signoret, Best Supporting Actress for Hermione Baddeley, and Best Adapted Screenplay, and it won 2 of those, which were 2 very good ones, which was Best Actress for Simone and Best Adapted Screenplay. So before the Oscars, Room at the Top won the Golden Globe for the Samuel Goldwyn Award, which no longer exists, / turned into the Best Foreign Film category. Even though it's not a foreign language film, they had a foreign film thing just for films that are not American. It won the BAFTA for Best British Film, and it actually won at Cannes for Best Actress for Simone, so that's pretty cool. And also Ben-Hur pretty much swept most of the season, so it really was not a contest going into the Oscars, where it won the Golden Globe, the BAFTA, the DGA, and the New York Film Critics. So everyone was having Ben-Hur fever. All right, so why do we ultimately think that Ben-Hur ends up winning here? I do think it's kind of a case where it's a little bit obvious, but I wanted to hear your thoughts.
I mean, watching the two of them side by side, to me, it felt like culture. It was just where the culture was at the time. Yeah. I mean, this Room at the Top is such a British film from this era. You can see the different mindsets. You can see how culture is different. You can see where Europe is after the war. Ben-Hur is where America was after the war. It's big. It's Technicolor. This, big Technicolor, epic, loud, everything about, conservative.
Yeah.
This is America in the 50s. And I mean, that really that was where my head was, at least after watching the two. It's I understand, while I mean, we'll get into my thoughts on the film. I understand why it won.
Yeah. Like I said, rather obvious in terms of the Oscars always really loving this big, epic, a very aggressively kind of American feeling film, even though it's not in America, it's still the big sword and sandal, big production that America really and Hollywood really depended on a lot.
Charlton Heston is about as aggressively American of a leading man as you can get in that era.
Yep, for sure. I've been talking quite a bit about John Wayne lately on the show, so pretty much a similar mode there. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's the big epic that was a big box office success. It got people to the movies to watch a movie that is almost 4 hours, for that matter. So that is an accomplishment in and of itself. I think for a long time, and in some cases is still the case, the Oscar voters really are all about kind of rewarding the big picture of the year for Best Picture. I mean, we haven't seen that quite as much lately with like Moonlight or Green Book, but certainly in this time period we had the Lawrence of Arabia's and the Bridge on the River Kwai's and all of that sort of thing being rewarded time and time again. So
you don't get much bigger than that. Yeah. Just that's the scope and the scale biblical. Of that is truly biblical.
Yeah. So here I did want to cover Room at the Top as far as being the choice for me for this being the runner-up to possibly unseat Ben-Hur. First of all, I don't think it's a totally clear film that I would say is number 2 from this lineup because of various factors, but I do think the actress win is big, especially over all of those more American stars. Having a more French actress winning that is kind of a big deal. And also the fact that it is literally the only film to beat Ben-Hur in a category is big. It wins adapted screenplay. That's the only award that Ben-Hur loses. Ben-Hur wins 11 Oscars, pretty much every technical category, plus Best Actor and Supporting Actor and Director. So the fact that Room at the Top is the only film to beat Ben-Hur was part of my decision there, and also just the way that it does kind of present an interesting dynamic between Ben-Hur being very old Hollywood traditional epic versus this new British New Wave film that would definitely lead to a lot in terms of what the Oscars would value, but also just the American public and the world would appreciate about kind of new ways to present film. So
it's a sign of the changing film scene. I mean, right when it was, and the direction Hollywood was quickly going that direction as well, because we had Cleopatra 2 years later.
Oh yes.
And so this collapse of the studio system was not far behind, and the movement was towards these smaller, more intimate films.
Yeah, lower budget, at least. Yeah. So I think that's genuinely, like, there was no way that Room at the Top was actually going to come anywhere close to beating Ben-Hur. I'm sure it was a runaway victory.
No, yeah.
But for our purposes, I do think of all of these that it probably came closest, just because it also had a good kind of zeitgeisty air to it, where I was reading a little bit just historical stuff about how the film was, I think, banned in Alabama or something like that, or one of those southern states, and
so much could be said.
Yeah. So there was kind of like an intrigue there, like, ooh, this mysterious kind of adult film that is causing a stir. There's something
those
interesting
spicy
about this.
European films.
Yes, very artsy. So I'm almost positive that, like, some of the more artistic minded arty types in the Academy were much more drawn to this than Ben-Hur. So that's my take on that.
I mean, and those other options are, this is really, the dichotomy as starkly as you can get it, because looking at the other options, you have A Nun Story, Anatomy of a Murder, and Anne Frank.
Yeah.
Three very, I mean, you got Jimmy Stewart, very fairly Hollywood choices. And the fact that, this was the only one, because I was surprised I'd forgotten about Anatomy of a Murder. It had been a long time since I'd seen it.
Yeah. That,
to me, would be one that I would have expected to have been closer.
Right, but also it didn't win anything.
Exactly. That to have this, to the fact that this one was able to come in and get screenplay, and that I completely get that win, just like I get with Best Actress.
Yeah.
I completely agree with your pick.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad it's not a huge mistake. I've had criticism before for some of my picks, but not getting into that. We can definitely talk about some of these other Best Picture nominees. Since you mentioned it, I wanted to talk about Anatomy of a Murder really quick. A fun Jimmy Stewart performance in that he's really trying, and he's it's a more dramatic, sort of darker role for him, I think, going to some darker territory overall. Not quite as family friendly as other films he had made before that, so kind of love that for him at that point in his career. I will say Lee Remick is really good in the film.
She's one who was so underappreciated.
Yes,
I think
yes,
there's one that I absolutely loved her in, but I wanted to check it before I say the title, and completely, which isn't a good testament for the film, but
Days of Wine and Roses.
See, and I'm thinking of Experiment in Terror,
okay,
which
there you go. Which she both 1962. Good year.
No, she's a name you don't hear mentioned a hell of a lot, and she's so good in everything she does, but it is just, she's one that never quite, maybe name gets lost in the sands of time, but
right.
And then Preminger on Anatomy of a Murder, you don't get too much. I mean, always solid.
Yeah. I love George C. Scott in the film. Always loved a George C. Scott performance, one of these earlier ones as well. I would say it's towards the top for my own personal ballot, because I think it does hold up, and it does kind of present it presents two sides of a case that is difficult, that kind of makes the audience be the jury in some ways. So I kind of think it's an interesting approach. It's a little long. It's like almost 3 hours, but that's okay.
Ben-Hur was that year.
Yes,
so.
There's a lot of big. Speaking of big, I mean, The Diary of Anne Frank is also pretty long as well, and actually, I think The Nun Story is too. So yeah, a lot of big bloated sort of films in this year. But The Diary of Anne Frank is kind of the, I guess, I don't want to call it just like the socially relevant film within this race, but it's kind of the thing that has the prior reputation of having the diary itself, and Anne Frank being a very well-known figure, of course. You know, kind of you see that and you're like, that feels very Academy friendly.
Exactly.
If that makes sense.
Very true.
That's not shade. That's just like, that's what they would naturally be drawn to. I don't like The Diary of Anne Frank as much as some of these others. I think they do some weird stuff with like trying to give Anne Frank more of like a romance sort of thing that I don't know if really fits with the general tone of things. But Shelley Winters is in this. I love Shelley Winters, as our listeners know. She is, it's I wouldn't call it like de-glam sort of thing, but it's that sort of sense of she's really committing herself to this kind of role. So yeah, she's great. She wins her Oscar for this. She wins Best Supporting Actress, and I don't think in this field she should have won that, but I will get to that later when I talk about other films released that year. And then we have The Nun Story, which is Audrey Hepburn. This is definitely a very dramatic role for Audrey, and it's very internal. It's very
coming at a time where she was still doing this. Must have been
Right.
This would have been a huge change for her, because she was coming off of the comedies, the musicals. This not in a nomination. You know, the presence there makes sense
for sure. Yeah. And it's one of these films that it doesn't have like any of that romance angle very much. It's very much centered on her and her life's journey of becoming a nun, but also being very tested and feeling doubt. And you can really feel just everything she goes through in that film. It was literally just on TCM like a week ago, so I set a recording for it. And it's really kind of a really fascinating, restrained performance from her that I think any Audrey person, any Audrey fan should definitely check out, because it's very dramatic. So
such watching her to get to be able to spread her wings like that and be
Yeah,
able to take off.
exactly.
And
yeah, and I mean, I don't want to give credit to the Academy as far as, oh, you're rewarding a film that's very female centric, because I mean, it's my point is that it's pretty rare for them to be rewarding and nominating a film where a woman is not necessarily just a love interest sort of thing at this time. So kudos for that, kind of.
anything, take what we can get sometimes.
I mean, yeah, it's damning with faint praise. So we got a few Twitter questions about some of these films. I asked for questions, and well, we kind of answered this already, but I just want to note that he asked it. This was from Andrew Carden, who said, did Hermione Badley's 2-minute and 19-second performance in Room at the Top really deserve an Oscar nomination? What do you think?
I don't think I'd be comfortable enough to take it away from her. That's hard. I mean, but I've seen some equally short ones, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. I was most definitely moved by that, and I will stick by what I said earlier, that I think it's an example of one scene nails it, coming so close to such a powerful climax that I would agree with it.
Yeah. Like I said, I think there's a lot worse performances that have been nominated for Oscars, and just because it's short, it shouldn't be the defining factor. So even though I'm like, well, it is like giving an Oscar nomination for 2 minutes of acting, it still is a good performance. So
if she made an impression enough to win in a film that size on 2 minutes and 19 seconds, it is a testament to something.
Absolutely. This was from Joe Gouveia, who said, should Lee Remick have been in the supporting actors conversation for Anatomy of a Murder? That's his first question. I would say yes.
I would I think our conversation about Lee Remick kind of answered that as well.
Definitely.
I believe she was under-recognized in her time.
Yeah. The other question from him is, Joseph Schildkraut gave the best supporting performance in The Diary of Anne Frank, but was left out of the supporting actor race. Why? Good question. He is nominated for a Golden Globe, so he was in the conversation. Mm-hmm. I would just say that there was heavy competition that year.
Yeah, you've got George C. Scott, who's constantly, who's dynamic in his own right. I mean, an industry name like Ed Wynn, who's just always there. Arthur O'Connell's a hell of a character actor.
Yeah.
I haven't seen The Young Philadelphians in so long. So Robert Vaughn, that kind of surprised me. I'd completely forgotten he was nominated. Mm-hmm. And then I'll get into my thoughts on the Ben-Hur nomination, and when we get there.
Okay. Yeah, not entirely sure why, other than maybe just the role itself. I believe he plays Anne Frank's father, but I need to check that to make sure. Yes, Otto Frank. Yes. So it's actually kind of a subtle role, and the Oscars don't really love subtlety, to be frank, generally speaking. So that's probably why it happened, but I don't see why not to throw a nomination in there for him. Let me see. So I don't think we had any other questions about any of the Best Picture nominees. We certainly got quite a few for the other films released that year, because there's a lot of good stuff. So any other thoughts on any of those before we move on to Should Have Been a Contender?
No, yeah, let's move on.
All right, so here we are, Should Have Been a Contender. This is where we talk about other films not nominated for Best Picture. Any old film, even if it's nominated for Oscars, or even if it's just completely would never have been on the Academy's radar. Any old film that came out in 1959. So, Kim, what's at the top of your list?
It's kind of the top is kind of an easy, almost embarrassing pick. But looking through the list, I mean, the first, North by Northwest.
Yeah.
I mean, such an accomplishment, just in terms of, that was a Hitchcock film that really grew on me. Well, watching it younger, it was like I was never quite, there was always parts that didn't gel for me, but just as I've aged and I've continued to watch it, there's just so much there to love in that film, and Hitchcock's complete mastery of that, the tone and the art form. And it's, in terms of scale, I mean, while it's not a biblical sword and sandal epic, you're working with so many tones, so many landscapes, so many countries, so many states. There's so much happening, and such dynamic performances from, Cary Grant is always a complete gem, Eva Marie Saint, James Mason, I don't think gets nearly as much love, nor does Martin Landau as he deserves.
Yes.
I mean, that was the first one that really jumped out. Yeah. I thought of Compulsion was another one that I thought of looking at the list. The Orson Welles take on the Leopold and Loeb murder case. That was one I saw a long time ago and really stuck with me, and got little middle school age me to start reading on the Leopold and Loeb case. That it was very on that grittier side kind of the content that was out at that point. But they're dealing with such an intense subject matter as the murder of a child. And then you've got Wells, who's always amazing. You've got a brilliant performance from Dean Stockwell in there. I thought that could have easily made a run. And
by the way, speaking of Cannes, Orson Welles and Dean Stockwell and Bradford Dillman all won the Cannes Best Actor Award.
Totally.
Alongside Simone Signoret for Best Actress. So just wanted to throw that in there because I can't say that I have seen Compulsion, but I've certainly heard a lot of great things about it. I will just say I mean, I think we should definitely talk about Some Like It Hot.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, for me, this is the film that missed out the most in terms of it was probably like 6th place for Best Picture because it gets into Best Director for Billy Wilder.
And then Jack Lemmon.
And Jack
right?
Lemmon,
Yeah.
yes, who is... I mentioned earlier how I was going to get to some other Best Actor choices outside of Lawrence Harvey and Charlton Heston. Jack Lemmon in Some Like It Hot is
I completely agree.
just, I mean...
He makes that
it's
film,
iconic.
really, for
Let's just
me.
say it.
It's
Yeah.
truly an iconic performance.
It is. He is just, I mean, speaking of committed, just like... What I love about Jack Lemmon is even though he can be pretty hammy and over the top sometimes, he always just finds the center somehow. And I just love that man. I've been watching a lot of Jack Lemmon movies and in this era when kind of his peak of things like The Apartment and Days of Wine and Roses. And so, yeah, I think he's a master. But the film itself, yes, it's a comedy classic, one of the best comedies ever made. And even though it's dealing with subject matter that has to do with cross-dressing and doing gender sort of reversals and things like that, it actually doesn't feel that dated to me, which is half the battle sometimes when kind of comedies like this in this era. So, huge credit to the film for being so timeless, I think.
Oh, completely.
And
I
ending
mean,
with a perfect line.
it's
Nobody's
a classic and it's completely deserved. And the fact I'm always stunned every time I watch that film that lead up to that ending that even got by. That they allowed that one to happen, and it's so perfectly acted by Lemmon, and it definitely, I mean, I have complete and utter love for that film, and that most certainly should have been up there.
Yeah, it should be in Best Picture. Just saying. Like, I don't know what I would take out, but it should be representing the best of 1959 for sure. And just Jack Lemmon's everything he's doing with Joe E. Brown as Osgood is just some of the best comedy I've ever seen. Yeah, we did get several questions about Some Like It Hot.
Okay.
So we're pretty much going to cover everything here because everyone wants to talk about it. Well, this is from, and I quote, Faye Dunaway's Salad Boy, a.k.a. Kyle Daly, who said, how on earth did Some Like It Hot not get nominated for Best Picture? Okay, so the Academy...
Is it horrendously cynical and jaded to say it's a comedy?
Yeah, exactly what I was going to say. Like, it's the Academy, they have a problem with horror, they have a problem with comedy, they have a problem with sci-fi, especially around this time, and even comedies that are great and get nominated for Best Director. There's always something like, oh, but is it one of the best pictures of the year? It's frustrating.
It's an age-old problem. They struggled with it then. They struggle with it now.
In 2019, they still struggle with it, so...
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, but like Bridesmaids and things like that should be nominated. But alas, it's a tale as old as time, really.
Stuffy Academy. Hopefully they're making steps to change it. I know they're taking little steps. Hopefully it works.
Diversifying their membership at least, so we shall see. This was from Jeffrey Kerr, who said, Jack Lemmon was the only lead from Some Like It Hot to receive an Oscar nomination. Did Tony Curtis and or Marilyn Monroe deserve nominations as well?
Oh, that's hard. I think of the two men, in my personal perspective, I think Lemmon is the right choice.
Sure.
I love Tony Curtis. I think he's so much more the straight man, for lack of a better word.
Right.
I was just talking with somebody about his being dubbed throughout the film. I mean, does that take away from the performance? I don't know. Monroe, on the other hand, I think every time I watch that, she shines in that performance. Yes. She's blonde, you get all that bombshell stuff, she's very pigeonholed into, what she is in her career, but there are such glimmers of, she shows such vulnerability as Sugar, especially as the movie gets going. There's real flashes of truly a great performance there that she doesn't really get credited for ever giving. And and she, she takes a backseat to the boys in that. And, Lemon is just such a powerhouse in it. But for a well-rounded, layered, dense almost dramatic at times, almost performance from Monroe, while I don't know who I would have taken out, I think she would definitely have been a contender in that.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't have a problem taking out Doris Day and Pillow Talk in favor of another comedy-centric performance in Marilyn Monroe. Just to have her be an Oscar nominee, I think, would just be kind of nice for history.
Oh, totally.
Just based on her impact and her screen presence, I think at least one would have been nice, I guess. I mean, you don't have to give her the win, but I think I would feel comfortable with putting her in that.
For such a storied career, and
exactly.
An actress who is so associated, she's all sex, she's all sex, all blonde bombshell. And she's such a complicated, such a complex woman that, it gets talked about more and more as we get later on, but, later into culture, away from when she was living. Yeah. But like Judy Garland, another one, there was flashes of such moments of just what was inside them as performers that it's a shame that Monroe wasn't nominated.
She did win the Golden Globe for this film, so she did not walk away totally empty-handed as far as trophies, but would have been nice to have the big one. This was from Claudio Alves, speaking of Marilyn. Was this the closest that she ever came to a nomination? And if not for this year, when? I would guess this is probably the closest she came, just because, again, of her Golden Globe win, the film being very well loved.
In terms of, and I can't speak as well to the logistics. I know in terms of what I would have loved to have seen, Don't Bother to Knock, I think was, as 1952 noir. She plays a babysitter who kind of kidnaps her charge. She's been traumatized after the war. Her boyfriend's been killed, and truly a stunning against type performance for her, and that would have been definitely a place where she could have been nominated.
Right. There was some potential for some of the ones before, Some Like It Hot, like 7 Year Itch, I think, maybe, possibly. The Prince and the Showgirl, possibly, just because she got some nominations for that elsewhere. I don't know if I actually don't know how much the reputation of her just being kind of tough to work with on set, quote unquote, did anything as far as her not getting votes for these kinds of things.
A quote unquote difficult woman having that used to shocking.
Yeah, that sort of reputation that I'm sure is greatly exaggerated, but I'm sure that didn't help matters. What a shame. But this was from Amy Thomason, who said, Some Like It Hot still totally holds up today. I show it to my middle school kids and they love it. Now for my question. Where was the supporting nomination for Joe E. Brown? I mean, come on.
I can't argue that one at all. He's as much of a star in that as Lemon is.
That expression on his face.
He's incredible.
Always satisfied. He's just rolling with the punches. By the way, totally progressive for 1959. Just being
perfect.
Right. You might be a man, but hey, I'm rolling with it. Why not?
If it works, it works.
Exactly. So, yeah, he should have gotten in here. I think that's a classic supporting performance that should have been nominated.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to other films. I just wanted to, since I talked about it briefly, wanted to mention Pillow Talk, which is the rom-com with Doris Day and Rock Hudson. Love me some Rock Hudson.
Uh-huh.
For reasons.
I can't argue.
Yeah. By the way, he is so gorgeous at Pillow Talk. I'm just saying.
That's peak Rock Hudson for me.
It really is.
That was my introduction to him, and his still my favorite role of his.
Yeah. And there's a lot of like innuendo with that film as far as talking about things like being in a closet that I just look at and I'm like, well, okay. Very on the nose, but sure, I mildly enjoy this. Pillow Talk is not the most earth-shattering film in the world, but it's cute for what it is.
Its reception always, it surprised me once I learned that, just how many, the nominations that it got. It seems like such a relatively, for lack of a better word, basic rom-com, rom-com. I mean, I love Doris Day. I love the film, but it just doesn't seem, I mean, maybe it's because it's that comedy rom-com that the Academy shouldn't like.
Yeah.
It stands out like a sore thumb in these categories.
Yeah, it does. By the way, it wins original screenplay. So, that's a choice. I mean, it wins over North by Northwest. That's a choice.
It's a choice.
It wins over The 400 Blows. It wins over Wild Strawberries.
And
it wins over Operation Petticoat. So that's that.
I do enjoy me some Operation Petticoat.
Fair
I do
enough.
like that film.
Yeah. But I don't think that win in particular necessarily holds up as much. But it's cute for its time. I do think it's just one of these films that's a great little time capsule of the cute romantic comedies of the 1950s kind of thing. And by the way, the title song in the main title sequence, it's a bop. I'm just gonna say it. Like it's a great song. Pillow Talk. Love it.
Thelma Ritter's nomination in that one, very well deserved.
Thelma, yeah, always reliable.
Thelma deserves the love. I love Thelma.
Yeah, never won.
Yep.
Never won an Oscar. 6 nominations. Did you have others on your list that you wanted to talk about?
A lot of what you've already mentioned, 400 Blows, the fact that was out that year, I'd completely, had forgotten about that till I started looking. And that's just such an achievement, such, Truffaut coming out of the gate and absolutely, standing apart from everything that was going on. Such fun movies that year. I mean, not, in the never would be nominated category, but dang it, I like it. House on Haunted Hill.
Ooh, nice.
The Gazebo, it's a Glenn Ford and Debbie Reynolds, and such a thriller comedy. Very feels not quite against type, but just feels different for both of them. They are a couple who he thinks he kills, somebody who's coming after his wife. And it's a fascinating film and based off a Broadway play. Every time I've watched it, it just stands out in just how different it feels in this very studio-based era with these two very studio stars. And I watched it a lot. I did a lot of research on Glenn Ford years back, and kind of another one he's one who I've always loved, who never really got that much attention for what he did. And it's a very small film, but very interesting for its time.
Imitation of Life for me.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I would completely agree.
Amazing. I think, like I said, love me a good melodrama, and this is a melodrama.
Can't go wrong with Sirk.
In spades. Douglas Sirk, I love. Yeah, that is definitely a film that feels ahead of its time in many ways in terms of dealing with race in dealing with differences and class differences, and really is a very emotionally wrenching film by the time I get to the end of it. Juanita Moore, I have to talk about as my far and away Best Supporting Actress winner of this lineup. That she loses to Shelley Winters, but honestly, it should be for Juanita Moore.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Completely agree.
Because that is just, it's kind of something that reminds me of Mildred Pierce, where it's like the mother who is just so devoted to her ungrateful child, for lack of a better word. And it's like the kind of thing where I definitely sympathize with that child more, who is also nominated. Susan Kohner, who plays Sarah Jane, is, to explain the film, I suppose, for context, is Juanita Moore is a black woman, and she has a daughter who presents more as white because of her father, I believe. And so this girl is growing up, and she's wanting to be white. She's wanting to kind of set her mother aside and make sure people don't know that she comes from a black family. She wants to just fit in, and
she's trying to pass.
Yeah. And the two of them get involved with this other couple, a mother and daughter, played by Lana Turner and Sandra Dee, and they bring them in as help. It's about the lives of these two mothers and daughters, and they go in very different directions, but the story of Sarah Jane, who is the girl who is trying to pass for white, is so fascinating, because it's like she does not feel at home with either identity, and she keeps getting punished in many ways for something she can't really control, and she wants to control the narrative, she wants to control her life, but she just can't get by without her mother being there and wanting to support her so much and defending her. And it gets to a point where she starts to resent her mother, and she shouldn't, and it's just so heartbreaking.
When that film, it taps into that lack of the insecurity of youth. And I mean, we were all at some point in teenage years ungrateful assholes, and
right.
The pain of those two, that Juanita Moore performance in particular is just, it's gut-wrenching.
Yeah.
And everything that those two women go through, and that was one that I thought of as well. And I'm so glad that they were at least nominated, but no, Moore should have definitely won.
Yeah. And also, I think the film should have a few more nominations as far as cinematography and art
beautiful
direction, and
Cirque stuff was always so gorgeous.
Gorgeous, yes. So kind of a sad loss there. And also, just looking at Juanita Moore's career, after she gives this gut-wrenching emotional performance, you would think that the roles would just keep coming for her, and it didn't really happen, and it's kind of a sad situation. So I mean, she still had a career, but it was very much like bit parts, and she's playing maids and very stereotypical kinds of roles that it's sad. But she lived a long life. She only died a few years ago in 2014. She was 99. So
really, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So
she's one of those cases, and from that era, there's so many performers that we need to shine another light on for what they were able to do, because there are so many instances like hers where that stardom just didn't happen. And we're looking at the era that we're working in, looking at everything that was going on. It's such a tragedy. And to think of the talent that we didn't get to see because of, issues and the faults in the thinking, and she could have had such a huge career. And the more films like these can be seen, and the more attention we can at least pay to what we have, just being able to define and get those names out there as much as we can.
Yes. So let this be a lesson. Please watch Imitation of Life for that incredible performance alone. I will add to, I guess, to fill out the Best Actress lineup, we have Suddenly Last Summer, which is a bonkers film. It is not what I would call high art or anything that I think should maybe be nominated for Best Picture by any means, but it is. Everyone is just going for it. I mean, we have two absolute divas of the screen in Katharine Hepburn and Elizabeth Taylor in this film, both getting nominated and both chewing up the scenery. Like,
with those names, it's no surprise that they would be up there.
This is an absolutely wild film. I don't know if you've seen it, but
I need to. That's one that's actually been on my list for a long time.
I will just say, Katharine Hepburn's entrance in this film is legendary. So whenever you see it, you will know exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh, definitely. No, it's quickly moving up on my list.
Yeah, it's very much like a soap opera sort of thing. It's like gothic, almost horror in some ways. Very, it's based on a Tennessee Williams play, so you know what to expect there. Yeah. And there's like psychiatric doctors, and there's homosexuality that's hinted at, and there's also cannibalism. So yeah.
I have seen that. I'm familiar. Yeah, that scene.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, it's a lot.
Montgomery Clift is always so good.
Yes, and he's very good in the film too.
So such another performer that just so layered, so interesting, exactly. So fascinating to watch.
Yeah. Well, we gotta, now that we're filling that out, this was from Mark Lamb, who said about the Best Actress lineup, Signore straddles the Best Actress category and Best Supporting. Who would win if she were absent? And he goes on to say, of the two Hepburns, Audrey had won 6 years earlier. Doris Day's nomination was for a comedy. Katharine Hepburn was close to supporting. Elizabeth Taylor, a bit de drope, also splits with Katharine Hepburn. Yeah, so I actually don't think that Simone Signoret is supporting in Room at the Top.
I agree. I think she should be actress.
I mean, I understand just because it's Lawrence Harvey's story, quote unquote, that he feels like the lead, but Simone has just so much screen time and so much presence that I feel like it's justified. But if she were not there, if she were in supporting, I would say that is a tough call, to be honest, as far as who would win. I mean, because Audrey had just won very recently. Doris Day, just not weighty enough. But at the same time, I'm like, Suddenly Last Summer doesn't really feel like a Best Actress winner. But I guess between everyone, I'm just gonna say Elizabeth Taylor, because she hadn't won yet. She would won for Butterfield 8 the next year, and then later with Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. So I don't know. I guess she was due, and it's a very over the top baity performance in a way that I guess maybe the Academy.
And sometimes those are enjoyed. It's right. I can't argue with your logic there at all, and it's
yeah. I mean, personally, I would just give the Oscar for Katharine Hepburn's iconic performance alone in terms of the entrance that she gives. Let's just say she's descending and ascending from the sky at various places in this film. Make of that what you will. Yes. So, another film that I just watched because of the Criterion Channel is the Best Foreign Language Film winner of that year, which is Black Orpheus. And this is a Brazilian adaptation of the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Really good, very vibrant, colorful, just exuberant kind of film, and a really interesting take on this story, kind of modernizing everything, and just seeing how different kinds of filmmakers can interpret a story just based on the country they're in, the culture, everything. The dance sequences are very fun in this film, and yeah, it's just a very like excitable sort of film that I definitely recommend if you like the story of
Definitely.
Orpheus and Eurydice, especially, which I very much do. Shout out to Hades Town, the Tony winner of this year. That is also kind of making that story relevant again. Did you have others here?
Oh, let's see. I am looking over, just noticing the Ori Kelly win for Some Like It Hot in costume.
Yeah.
That's definitely those Monroe dresses in particular,
Yes.
just absolutely staggering and just doing exactly what they need to with the black and white cinematography.
Yep.
It's Ben-Hur's year, really.
It really is.
It's
Everyone, any other film is just like, God, why did we have to come out in the year of Ben-Hur?
going back to foreign language. I am surprised no 400 Blows in there. That
Yeah, I think
for the classic that has really become,
right.
to have that absent there and to be at really the pinnacle of such an important cinematic movement, to have that not be there.
I think the reason for that, honestly, is just because Black Orpheus is technically from France, and they can only have one film
true.
per country.
Touché.
So this
Very
is the
true.
one they submitted over the 400 Blows, which they won. So
Yeah,
good call. But I almost wonder if the 400 Blows probably could have won too, if it was submitted. But yeah, good call there. I will just say I was delighted to see that Sleeping Beauty came out this year.
Yes, I was going to mention that one as well.
Okay, yeah. This was a big favorite of mine growing up, I must say. I watched this movie so many times.
I've worn out copies.
Yes. I just remember being at my grandparents' house, just like wanting to watch it over and over again. My poor grandparents were just like, why does he want to keep watching this one? I don't know why. But you know what it really was? It's really just Maleficent. I mean,
she's fabulous. What can we say? I mean,
I stan. I mean, she's just fierce. She's fabulous, and she's great.
Just an evil sorceress trying to make her way in the world, honestly.
Yes. And
I
related to it, basically.
I saw Sleeping Beauty at Turner Classic Film Festival this year.
Ooh,
and
I would have loved that, yeah.
Stunning on the absolutely stunning on the big screen. It's having, watched it so many times on TV just such a gorgeous film. And to me, it's probably my favorite Disney film from that era, and just such an achievement visually.
Yeah, not exactly the most lively protagonist, but
which one of the Disney princesses from that era really are, though?
I mean, like, literally she's sleeping the entire time, but yes.
We're there for Maleficent and the fairies.
Yes,
They're there, it's all the fun.
Yeah, I love the fairies. Yes. Also, I imagine that big dragon sequence at the end must have been really cool to see on the big screen.
Oh God, so all the colors, so vibrant, so dynamic, so visual. Loved it.
Yeah.
I was crying through parts of it. I didn't think I would, but it looked so amazing.
Well, another thing, it's beautiful music as well. A really great score. Good songs. Once Upon a Dream is beautiful. Very good year, I must say.
Incredible year. So much to talk about.
Yeah.
And looking at the list, just the variation in the categories.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm seeing Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Right.
A fun one that really doesn't get talked about a hell of a lot, but to have a Disney kind of kid or very kid-based fantasy film even popping up at all.
Right. Yeah, we got a few other questions I just wanted to throw in here before we move on to our final segment. This was from Ian Balakalak, who said, do you know the reason why Ingmar Bergman refused his nomination in Best Screenplay for Wild Strawberries? So this did in fact happen. He refused his nomination. I did some research on this. He sent a message to the Academy, and I wrote it down, and he said, Wild Strawberries didn't compete for quote-unquote Oscar. I think it is wrong to nominate the picture, and therefore I want to return the certificate of nomination. He goes on to say, I have found that the Oscar nomination is one for the motion picture art humiliating institution, and ask you to be released from the attention of the jury in the future. So, I don't know exactly why he said that, but
That's
think...
deep. That's very deep.
Yes. I think generally speaking, because I've been doing enough research in terms of the 50s, 60s, and 70s at the Oscars, there was definitely a feeling of certain artist types that the Oscars are just this gaudy sort of popularity contest sort of thing. And,
a view that still prevails.
Well, yes, but people were really outspoken about saying it, even more so than they are now at that time. Even like very prominent movie stars just refused to attend the Oscars on principle, which we don't really see anymore. So I think that might be just kind of the attitude of the time, maybe.
It was the peak of the studio system. Peak is gaudy and technicolor and big as we really got in filmmaking of that era.
Right.
I mean, this was the era of the MGM, the MGM musicals. This was Technicolor. This was 3D. This was Smell-O-Vision. This
right.
This was the 50s, man. So yeah,
it was a lot.
It makes sense.
Yeah. I didn't cover this from before when I talked about Pillow Talk, but I suppose it's worth answering. Justin Priest said, how on earth did Pillow Talk beat North by Northwest for Best Original Screenplay?
I don't know. I have no idea.
I just think, generally speaking, Pillow Talk was a movie they appreciated more than North by Northwest, and sometimes that's all that matters.
I tend to be of the belief that there's certain people who just make it look too easy, whether or not it be in directing or, Cary Grant's one and also, one with acting. There's just certain people make things look effortless. Yeah. And Hitchcock is really that for just his films. I mean, and it's a crime how under-recognized by the Academy he was, and it's just another example of that. Yeah,
I mean, I don't know. Pillow Talk gets 5 nominations. 2 actors are in, and North by Northwest gets 3. I don't know. I'm just trying to reason it out with math, and I don't really know. I can't really compute why exactly a movie like Pillow Talk would end up beating a very brilliant script by Ernest Lehman from North by Northwest. So the answer is I don't know.
No clue.
Sadly, wish I had answers. Okay, so let's see. This was from Rob Barlow, who said, did the music of A Summer Place make the movie A Summer Place a hit, or is it the other way around?
A Summer Place is a movie that I have a hugely long history with, and the reactions to it continue to surprise me because I watched it when I was so young. I don't think I necessarily saw the culty, just how insane the melodrama is to it. I mean, I was watching it, just aired on TCM within the last couple of days, and just watching people just losing their minds about how over the top parts of that continually stuns me because I've watched it so long I barely even see it. In my personal opinion, I think the music is one of the best parts of the film. I think it's a gorgeous composition and
holds up.
Yeah, completely.
Well, what do you think? Do you think it was the music that did it, or just the movie that made the music popular? Is that even an answerable question? I don't even know. What came first, the chicken or the egg?
I think the music honestly probably keeps that movie going. I mean, I love Sandra Dee. I love Troy Donahue, but it's such a strange movie that probably could have only worked in that particular era of the 50s in terms of melodrama. It's so convoluted in terms of sex and in terms of gender and everything that's going on that it's it's at home there, but it's really a strange film in places. That, yeah, I think I think the music is what keeps it timeless, and really, it's the music.
Fair enough. Yeah, I would generally agree with that. So that's it for questions, but I just want to end this segment by reading a few quotes from Inside Oscar, which I like to do every week, and just give a taste for what people were talking about in that general Oscar year. This was from Shelley Winters, who won her Oscar for Best Supporting Actress. Said she was crying backstage, and she ends up saying, this is why I just love Shelley Winters. She says, "Simone and I are going to change the styles of the women of the world. No more size 8s."
Oh, that's gorgeous. I love that.
But then she goes on to say, I brought my Oscar home, and Tony took one look at it, and I knew the marriage was over. And they were divorced later that year. So the old Best Actress curse, it continues on. Because that is a thing. Yeah. The other thing, I just wanted to give a little quote from our little sweetheart, John Wayne. Yes. So he talked about Suddenly Last Summer. And you can only imagine his reaction to this film. He says, "I don't intend to see it. The subject matter is too distasteful to be put on a screen designed to entertain a family or any member of a decent family."
Oh, John.
So, there you have it. Movies are just made for families.
The Duke.
Truly.
The Duke being the Duke.
So, there you have it, folks. What a year 1959 was.
Crazy year, just in
really
terms of everything and what was coming out of Hollywood. You don't get much more varied than that.
Exactly. Yeah. And I love that this is our first entry into the 50s. It's a very exciting year.
Definitely.
And I recommend a lot of these movies, a lot of them that hold up. So, okay. When we come back, we will be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Ben-Hur deserved Best Picture or if Room at the Top really deserved it.
The nominated pictures are Anatomy of Murder, Otto Preminger, Columbia, Otto Preminger, producer. Ben-Hur, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Sam Zimbalist, producer. The Diary of Anne Frank, 20th Century Fox, George Stevens, producer. The Nun Story, Warner Brothers, Henry Blanke, producer. And Room at the Top, Romulus Films, John and James Wolfe, producers. And now, the winner, Ben-Hur, Sam Zimbalist.
And we're back. So now we will be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Ben-Hur deserved Best Picture or if Room at the Top really deserved it. Kimberly Pierce, what is your verdict?
Oh, this was a very hard question for me to answer. Looking at it from a question of taste or my preference, I have one answer, but from a filmic perspective, I have another. I mean, from looking at it as a film, looking at the history, looking at the year, I think Ben-Hur gets it hands down. I mean, did I enjoy Room at the Top more? Yes. Did I struggle with Ben-Hur? Yes. There are parts of that I don't think, watching it from a contemporary perspective, the film really doesn't age well.
Yeah.
I will freely admit, and I think I've been on the record saying this before, I struggle with Charlton Heston in almost everything. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot kind of working uphill for me on this to really get into it. But it's truly just staggering that how the cinematography works well with the direction, and it's beautiful. I mean, issues with the acting aside, the editing in the sequence on board the ship really stands out as just well cut, just capturing the pace, capturing the tone, capturing the tension in these moments. The Stephen Boyd performance I absolutely loved. I think he is
He should have gotten a
actually
nomination.
he should have, and
Yeah.
that was what I really wanted to get to, because he was brilliant in the film, and to think that he didn't get in on that Best Supporting Actor nomination I thought was completely tragic, because he was my favorite part of the film. But once you get to that, and actually in the pacing, it didn't, at least through the chariot race, that did not feel like a 3+ hour movie for me. They completely lost me in the last. Once the chariot race hits, I was completely fell off that chariot and got, ended up under both wheels. I felt like the film should have ended there.
Yep, because there's another 40 minutes. Which
It
I
was
forgot
like,
about.
and suddenly suddenly it felt like a 3 hour and 40-minute film.
Yeah.
But when you get to the chariot race sequence, it was, to me, it flew. And that
electrifying,
chariot race is iconic in every sense of the word, and it feels it. And to me, using that same logic that I used for the Best Supporting Actress nomination, if one scene can clinch a nomination, I think that what they were able to do with the action and the overall composition of that chariot race was just stunning. The work, the effort, the production that must have gone into that in an era when we weren't, you didn't have the computer effects. You were having to do all that stuff practically, and the lives that were at stake and the effort that must have gone into it. It was such a cinematic achievement. And I think that really goes into why Ben-Hur won, and it probably, in the terms of what was nominated and at the time it should have won, because it is just a tremendous visual achievement in every sense of the word.
Very good. All right. So this is always a tricky question for me, because I'm weighing whether the personal should outweigh just the impact of a film itself.
And my personal answer would have been totally different. Yeah, I completely agree.
I mean, honestly, I think I probably would have picked Anatomy of a Murder over all of them if I had the option. But between the two of them, I think both films, Ben-Hur and Room at the Top, have their faults to them in a way that I don't think it's totally obvious one over the other. I love the personal melodrama and everything to do with Room at the Top, because that's more my speed anyway compared to what Ben-Hur is doing. So I'm a little bit biased in terms of which film I would just naturally prefer. But I also cannot deny everything you were saying about the impact and the scale and the everything that went into Ben-Hur is just monumental and still looks really amazing 60 years later. The cinematography and the editing, like you said, especially that racing scene is amazing to watch. And still holds up. So, and I think honestly, directors of action films should study scenes like that to just really be able to make the audience engage with your film and not zone out like I often do in many of these action sequences.
It shows what you can do with practical effects and not having to drown things in the editing. There's so many action films now, it's cut. It's like, no, they let the action play it out. They actually had to stage it. They actually had to put things into it. It's completely should be studied.
Yeah, for sure. Didn't mention the Hugh Griffith win for Ben-Hur for Best Supporting Actor. He plays a sheik, and it's not my favorite performance. It's not anywhere.
Stephen Boyd should have won.
Not anywhere near what Stephen Boyd is doing. But once again, we go back to the Oscars being very taken with the big, over-the-top, showy performances, and that's certainly what he's doing. So that is what it is. I will just say, I will leave Ben-Hur as the Best Picture winner of this year, just from a sheer technical respect level, even if I don't really take to the story as much as I do with Room at the Top. I think it's fine how it is, how it played out. So I honestly, like, looking back, people would have just been like, wow, Ben-Hur lost to something like Room at the Top. How did that happen? So,
yeah.
you know, I mean, it's fine. It's fine. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you so much, Kim, for joining me today.
Oh, thank you again for having me. Had fun.
Yeah, this was very fun. And you're welcome to come back as I dip further into Oscar history. Yeah.
Please, I would love it. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So tell the people where they can find more of you on the internet.
The easiest place to find me is on Twitter. I'm at kpierce624. I'm also doing any of my writing can also be found at Geek Girl Authority, and then I still have a lot of stuff posted at Citizen Dame as well, citizendame.com.
Excellent. And you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The show is at Oscar Runner Up, and you can find the show anywhere podcasts can be found. But on Apple Podcasts, please give my little podcast a 5-star review, if you don't mind. It always helps and always boosts my ego a little bit. And if you like this and you want to hear more bonus content, you can definitely subscribe on Patreon at patreon.com/andtherunnerup_is. I cover other films in Best Picture nominated films that I didn't cover on the regular show. You may have heard a co-host of Kim's named Karen Peterson on one of those, talking about The Big Short, and so we have a lot of fun over there. So just go ahead over on patreon.com/andtherunnerup_is for more great content. So once again, thank you, Kim.
No, thank you.
And I will bid you all adieu.